Welcome to the Darkstream, VoxDay, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for firing it up. Audio and video are good. D-Live chat is rolling. Unauthorized chat is rolling, and super chats are live. So the writers' strike has begun. And it's interesting to see that a number of folks are in Hollywood and so forth are doing the usual striking the noble poses and voluntarily shutting down their shows and that sort of thing. It's kind of amusing in that you've got these talk show hosts, the Jimmy Fallons, the Conan O'Briens and stuff. And the fact that they have to have writers for these interview shows just demonstrates how risibly fake the whole thing is. I mean, you can't even have somebody come on and just talk to them without having things all pre-scripted and decide what the talking points are and laid out for you and teleprompters created and so forth. I mean, you've seen me do interviews on this stream. I've been on Big Bear stream, Molyneux stream, etc., etc., and we managed to function just fine without any writers putting words in our mouth. So the mere fact that writers have been proved to be necessary to some of these shows just indicates how fake the whole structure is and always has been. But writers are important. It's one of the strange dichotomies that writers are genuinely important. They're often among the few figures of history who last, who survive over time. And their ideas shape how people think and how people live, sometimes for thousands of years. It's really remarkable when you think about it. My life has been distinctly and directly affected by the writings of Jerry Pournelle, by the writings of Marcus Aurelius, by the writers of various histories, and of course, the Bible, although that's not fiction. But then neither is philosophy. And so it's astonishing that people who can have such a important and lasting effect on so many people are also almost always poor, almost always unrewarded for their efforts. In our society, what you're rewarded for is becoming an influencer, becoming a talking head, getting popular on video. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. There's very good reason why the visual medium is much more popular with the average individual than books, or even scripted entertainment, television, movies, and so forth. And there's a number of reasons for that. Middlemen have always prospered. The people who take product A, and, take the product and move them from point A to point B. And so that's natural. Also, there's something about the normal writer's psyche that tends to render them hapless, if not downright retarded, as basic business people. I mean, I cannot tell you how many writers I've talked to at one point or another. And so many of them want to write something, including myself, that nobody wants to read. I knew that if I was absolutely successful in writing what I wanted to write with Summa Helvetica, it wasn't going to be very popular because it was going to be over a lot of people's heads. And I think it's only because I failed in my vision that it fundamentally succeeded as a story. In fact, I don't know if I'd like to think it or if I hate to think it. I guess from an ego point of view, you'd like to think it, but on a more objective perspective, you hate to think it. I sometimes wonder if I subconsciously sacrificed the vision for the story. It's the right thing to do if you're seeking entertainment. But I wasn't really seeking to sell those books. I mean, the only reason it got published in the first place was Jeff Gerke had left his big Christian publisher, was looking to set up his own operation. And at the time I was getting book contracts signed with Pocket Books, with who was it? Thompson. Yeah, Thompson, I think it was, the big Christian publisher in the South. I was getting these sizable book deals with major publishers. And so when this guy came up and said, "Hey, I'd like to publish something," my first instinct was to say, "Well, why would I publish with you?" Right? But then I realized, hey, here's an opportunity to write something that isn't commercial at all, and he'll still put it in print. Because back then, this is before Castalia, we didn't have the ability to put stuff in print. Ingram Spark hadn't really gotten going. You could put something on Kindle, but to do an actual book, actual hardcover, was not possible unless you were with some kind of publisher. And so, I took advantage of that, but didn't manage to write the completely anti-commercial book I was planning to write. I was planning to write something that was supposed to be more of a intellectual, philosophical fireworks show than a story proper. I didn't pull it off, and that's probably for the best, because if I had, I very much doubt A Throne of Bones would have been written at all, and certainly not written in the way that it was, in which I threw out all subtext, all attempt to impress anybody with anything, and just focused on the characters and the story. That's it. And obviously that worked quite a bit better than my previous approaches. Basically, I got out of the way of the story. And that was a good thing to do. But writers are so reluctant to get out of their own way. They get so attached to their ideas that they can't realize that nobody else is interested in them. Now, sometimes, obviously, we're wrong about what we think people are going to be interested in. I'm still surprised by the massive enthusiasm for the sociosexual hierarchy. I'm much I'm, I mean, I now think that it should be, it merits that level of interest and more, but for its substance, for its utility. What puzzles me is that it's probably the most successful thing I've ever created, or created is the wrong word, that I've ever articulated. And yet it's being embraced and endorsed and referenced in not just unintended forms, but in totally useless forms. You know, there's no utility to Sigma grind set, how to become a Sigma. None at all. Fencing Bear's right. Tolkien never imagined that his books were going to become anywhere near as popular and successful as they did. It's kind of a pity he didn't have more of an idea, because then he might have done a better job of protecting his rights. But Fencing Bear, you know, Professor Rachel is a perfect example. I've been trying to get her to turn The Forge of Tolkien into a book for years. I think I first told her to do that 3 years ago, maybe 4. You know, but, you know, as like most writers, she wants to write every book except for the one that will actually sell. Milo is exactly the same way. Q1882 says, I just heard my little brother, or my friend's little brother, bring up Sigma the other day. I had no idea how wide it spread. Oh, it's massive. It's absolutely massive, because apparently people are more interested in giving themselves labels than anything else. Reprobus says, where are all the how to maximize Delta Bravo traits? Non-existent. Exactly. That's what's so ridiculous, is because everybody's focusing on redefining a way for them to consider themselves on the top of the heap. You know, look, if you want to be considered on the top of the heap, date a supermodel. You know, then you'll be considered on the top of the heap, right? Redefining things so that you can consider yourself on the top of the heap is absurd. While we are still on the topic of SSH, just saw a Sigma Male Bible on Amazon, 140 pages of delusion. Yeah, there's going to be more of that. There's going to be a lot more of that, and it's fine. The truth is going to shine its way through the nonsense. I mean, it's not even impossible. I'm not saying this is the case, but it's not even impossible that the same people that suppress my blog and suppress our stuff on YouTube and kick us off of Twitter and all that stuff, it's entirely possible that the huge increase in the amount of all things Sigma is simply to flood the market and prevent the SSH book from, or even just my discussions of it from becoming mainstream. Speaking of alpha game, Coffee Grounds Bear says, "Hey Vox, my first son was born today. Congratulations! That's great news. Nothing like it. Absolutely nothing like it. Wanted to give a thank you to you and others, including Owen, who helped push me to Christ and fatherhood." Well, you're very welcome. That's really good. That's really great. And my only advice to you is always put your family first. Your job first and foremost is to protect and provide for your son, raise him up, and then have his back. If you do that, you're doing well. Hawk says the other SSH meme to have gone nuclear is Alpha Dad, which they actually seem to have gotten 95% right. Well, I haven't paid any attention to that, of course, but one of the things that I'm addressing in the book is one of the problems of the Alpha Dad. It may or may not apply to the Sigma Dad as well. I'll have to ask my kids to chime in on that. But I have a friend whose father was an Alpha. He's a Bravo. And I'm telling you, having an Alpha Dad was, even though he had a great relationship with his dad, in fact, it was probably too great a relationship, because it tended to get in the way of him living his life. I mean, don't get me wrong. I loved his dad. I loved his mom. They're a great family. But his dad being the Alpha, the Leo, etc., 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 the top executive at a Fortune 50 company, he just tended to dominate my friend's life. But never in a way that built up my friend, never in a way that made my friend stronger, but always in a way that made him subordinate to his dad. And that was one thing that I was always very determined not to do with my sons, if I had any, was, you can't dictate their lives. You can express your opinion, you can encourage them, you can support them, you can have their back, but you can't just tell them what to do. You can't just boss them around. I mean, and what I mean by that is, we would have plans to do something on the weekend. And then, we'd be out Friday night talking about, and I'd say, "Hey, so do you want to go water skiing? Are you still going water skiing tomorrow?" And he's like, "Well, no, I'm not. I got to cancel. My dad's decided that we're going to put the dock in, so I need to go up there and do it." I was like, "Dude, you're 23 years old. You're graduated from college. You have your own apartment. How is he dictating your social schedule at this point?" And, I mean, even right to the end, he, actually, no, I'm gonna, that's getting into other people's business, so I'm not going to say anything, but, I mean, you see it from time to time. You see these alpha dads who turn on the charm when their son brings home a girlfriend, or they, you know, get a little bit flirtatious with their daughter's friends. I mean, it's understandable. They're alphas. That's what they're going to do. But it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it, it makes it challenging. And I think that that's one reason why you very seldom see alpha sons of alpha fathers. You know, you're also probably not going to see a whole lot of sigma sons of sigma fathers because, uh, and actually that's not true. You might if the sigma abandons the family, then you might end up with uh, a sigma son, sigma father. But in general, and of course also it's just normal. I mean, you see this all the time in royal houses. You know, Saul is a classic alpha, but Jonathan was a Bravo, which drove Saul crazy. You know, but the funny thing is, of course, Saul helped prevent Jonathan from developing in the way that he might have. I mean, it's kind of funny when you really look closely, when you read the whole Saul, David, and Jonathan story closely. Because one of the things that's missing, and I've written like, I don't know, 20,000 words on a thing I call the Chronicles of King David, which at some point perhaps I'll come back to. But what was interesting about it was that, or what I think is interesting about it, is that all I really did for the characters was stick to their actual biblical portrayals. People tend to forget that Jonathan was a stud. Jonathan was a serious warrior. Jonathan was a definite leader of men. But his father couldn't support him in that. And and of course, we all know it didn't end very well for Saul or for Jonathan. And you also look at David. David developed into an alpha, obviously. And he's like in one way, he's the poster boy for alpha unfaithfulness. He couldn't bear the fact that one of his deltas had a hot wife. That speaking of writing, one of the things that convinces me of the reality of the Bible is the way that the level of the writing is so phenomenal. The only thing that has even a fraction of the storytelling power of the Bible is maybe the complete works of Shakespeare, and that isn't, and it's not even close. It's the most of the writing of the stories themselves and the dialogue and so forth is absolutely superlative. No, see, this is where people just don't seem to be paying any freaking attention at all. Was David a Sigma, maybe? No, hell no. Don't be a complete freaking moron. How can you possibly ask a question like that and claim that you have any understanding of what sigma even means. David was massively popular, worshipped by the entire nation of Israel before he was 20 years old. Does that sound like a James Bond or a Clint Eastwood in the West figure to you? It's practically the complete opposite. I mean, there's literally nothing whatsoever sigma about David. And that's one of the things that confuses people is, alpha is and remains the pinnacle. Sigma is not the pinnacle. It's not even in the hierarchy. Okay, I'm going to give Colin Cuts a little bit more. Is Trump a sigma? Maybe. Never in a billion years. How could Trump possibly be a sigma? He's practically the walking, swaggering, strutting, popular. Oh, okay. That was. You need to indicate that somehow. It doesn't come across in text. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump is practically the personification of alpha. You know, the it's interesting. I think when you look at the Godfather. Now remember, you have to be very cautious about using fictional examples because fiction is fiction isn't real. So they can combine things in ways that are not really practical in real life. Who's a good biblical example of a sigma? No, not Moses. Moses was absolutely alpha. I mean, he was a royal prince in the Egyptian household. He was a leader of his people. Joseph Joseph looks frankly he reads a lot more gamma to me. But I don't think there's enough information on Joseph. I think you could make a case. I mean, I can see why someone might suggest John the Baptist, but he had a lot of disciples and everything. I would say that probably I would tend to lean more towards Elijah. Elijah strikes me as being considerably more sigma, especially because of the way that when he mocks the priests of Baal, or Baal, or however you pronounce it. I think that, I mean, he was also, uh, prone to abandoning things. Moses had to be forced by God to be a leader. That's true. I mean, Moses. I think you can at least attempt to make a case for it, but Moses threw away his royal status inadvertently. I mean, murdering someone in a passion is not indicative of sigma status. I don't know about Jeremiah. I don't have an opinion. Um, but what? Yeah, and also again with Moses, the Moses and Aaron thing is you definitely have a Alpha Bravo relationship there. Um, but what struck me about Elijah in particular is the way that he's very just off doing his own thing, doing his mission, and he doesn't seem to have the respect for the authorities. You know, just the total disrespect that he shows for the priests of Baal. Remember, these are powerful men of authority, and so. Um, but anyhow, no, I don't. Again, I think it's very difficult to try to place like you can't place people very easily based on their nonfiction writing. I wouldn't say so, but you know, Elijah's my best guess at the moment, not having thought the matter through deeply. I mean, Judas obviously is a gamma. He's practically an archetypical gamma. Um, so anyhow, but to get back to writing, you know, it was interesting to see that, or to learn that Deuce, who was the original mommy blogger, killed herself 5 days ago. Now that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was the Daily Mail did a piece on um, on the fate of a number of the early mommy bloggers, some of whom were very, very successful. And it was really astonishing to see how many of them ended very badly. And even worse, how many of them harmed their children, even killed their children through some form of Munchausen by proxy syndrome, which they were doing to generate pity and to generate attention. Because I think at the end of the day, you need to have some element of narcissism to be a writer, probably not as much as you need to be an entertainer, but and that's not necessarily bad. It's just probably a necessity. And it was just really astonishing to me to see how many of these early mommy bloggers ended up really badly. Hooten says, I tend to think using your family online is abusive and manipulative. It is now. But you have to remember, the internet wasn't the internet when people first started using it. You know, people didn't realize that, you know, that the internet was forever. They genuinely didn't. And it also wasn't as widespread. And more importantly, you didn't have this cancel culture that involved, you know, outing people, doxing people, looking up everything they had ever written and going over it with a fine-tooth comb in order to try to destroy them. You know, it's kind of funny because, you know, people have occasionally tried to say, "Oh, I think it's, you know, I think it's really courageous, you know, what you've done, etc., etc." And I always tell people this: courage had nothing to do with it. I never chose this. You know, I was in the game before the current set of rules. You know, I even chose a pen name because it used to be that pen names would actually generally allow you to stay separate from your day-to-day life. You know, it really wasn't a problem. But once the archival aspect of the internet attached to the attack dog aspect of the internet, then all of us who'd been writing for traditional media were screwed. You know, here we have this track record of everything we said. It was kind of funny because I never made any attempt whatsoever to hide the link between my name and my pen name. I mean, I think the first Rebel Moon novel, which was written by Vox Day and Bruce Bethke, actually says copyright Theodore Beale on it. Not a big deal. What was kind of funny, and it shows you how poorly read the early internet doxers were, is that the people who first drew the connection did so as a result of a interview that I did with Game Developer magazine, because it was an interview with me in my real life persona as a game developer, but they mentioned the fact that I also wrote under the name Vox Day. And that was the big link that the people on early Wikipedia or whatever needed. Personally, I thought it was kind of funny just because, I mean, you know what my pen name means if you follow the Latin into Greek, but most people, basically, if you weren't a editor of Computer Gaming World, you were not capable of figuring that out on the fly on your own. It was just kind of funny because both Johnny Wilson and Chris Lombardi immediately grasped it without being told. It was kind of funny. Don't want to steal the mic, but I just wanted to comment how impressed I have of how well Vox have settled in Europe right after Eurovision. So, okay, I don't know. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I've lived in Europe most of my adult life at this point. So, you know, thanks to my time in Japan, I think I've lived in Europe more than I've lived in the USA. So, anyhow, but you know, it's always kind of amusing to me how, you know, people will say, you know, if somebody moves into the States from Guatemala and they start watching baseball, and you know they're there for like 3 years, people are like, "You're a real American. You're a real true American." And you know, meanwhile, I'm living in Europe for whatever it is, 25 years, and and people are like, "You're just American. What do you know?" I'm like, how does this make any sense? You know, I mean, it is different in one way, which is, of course, just like as with the English in the previous century, because American culture is so worldwide, you can be comfortable in your home culture to the extent that you wish. You can live in the Philippines. You can live in Spain. You can live in Australia. You can live in Italy, Switzerland, Germany, whatever, and basically never really be outside of America if you choose to live that way. And it's kind of the same with the English. We had a friend when we were in the Italian part, and they'd been there for something like 15 years. And while the wife spoke pretty good Italian, the husband, she used to joke that he learns one word a year. Except you can't have Taco Bell. Hey, you can if you're in Spain. I've done it. And in fact, you can even have Zapata, of all things, which is pretty much the ultimate. You can even have Zapata in Amsterdam. The cars in the grocery stores are different, but they're not as different as they used to be. Or at least they're not. What's here now is, Europe has gone through a transformation so that the grocery stores now are. I mean, do you remember? If you're old enough, if you're my age, you can remember like the small grocery stores, the Red Owl, the Kowalski's, and then there was the transformation to like the super values, the big ones, the Publix, and so forth. And that change happened in the middle 90s in the States. And it happened probably about 2010. Turned about 2010. The same sort of thing happened. Not to the same extent. It's not quite as big, but it's still pretty. It's still pretty significant. Ian says, my family sends me American candy. Yeah, that's one area where Europe just cannot touch the States. I mean, yes, Swiss chocolate, Belgian chocolate is much, much better. But in terms of like making candy bars and different types of like basic candies and stuff, yeah, I mean, you can't top that. Although I will say that the chocolate Easter eggs that they make in an astonishing array of different fillings and stuff, that's one area where they're really getting it right. They've got like chocolate chip or caramel or raspberry or various combinations of things that are really great in much the same way that the ability to choose between Snickers and Milky Way and Bit O' Honey and Baby Ruth and $1,000 bar and so forth. Space Bunny, of course, is a massive, massive fan of Reese's peanut butter cups, and so that's always a of course everybody loves Reese's peanut butter cups. I mean, who doesn't? So that's always a bit of a struggle. Sorry, Fencing Bear, you're wrong. I mean, maybe Chicago chocolate is as good as Belgian chocolate, but nothing as good as Swiss chocolate. I've had Belgian chocolate. I've had that San Francisco chocolate that everybody likes. It's just not as good. But I am a fan of all good chocolates, so it's not like I would speak badly about any of those things. I think there's even a place for Hershey's. Oh, believe me, you're wrong. I know the absolute best factory in the world. So the Ghirardelli, that's it. Yeah, Ghirardelli's good. I like it, but not as good. Sour Patch and nerds are banned in the Eurozone. Yeah, I don't see that as a big loss, honestly. I don't see that as a big loss. But the interesting element of the writer's strike, to get back to the subject, um, as one individual pointed out, there's no way the writers can win. Because at the end of the day, they really haven't been doing their job. Most of the good writers have been driven out, and now they have a bunch of mediocrities. They've got politically correct mediocrities, writing narrative propaganda, and you don't need a real writer to do that. The stuff that's being produced by ChatGPT is not only good enough to pass for that mediocre writing, it's arguably better because it's probably less devoted to the narrative. It's easier for the producers to tweak the amount of narrative involved than deal with the writers. And it's free. So what I think is going to happen is that most mainstream entertainment is going to be a much smaller number of writers who are essentially, as somebody said, AI wranglers. They're going to be able to replace a whole team of writers with a two people that put in the inputs to the AI, tweak the buttons, and boom. That's going to be so much more cost effective, and they need it to be cost effective because the business model of Hollywood over the last 40 years has been, we're going to piggyback off of the cable channels, forcing you to pay us. But that's not working anymore. Once people were no longer forced to pay for channels they didn't necessarily want. And that's what streaming fundamentally does. Streaming fundamentally lets you choose what you want to watch when you want to watch it. You couldn't do that with cable. You couldn't do that with broadcast. And this, of course, is why it's so important for you guys to subscribe to Unauthorized, because that's voting with your dollars. And that's what allows us to produce what we're producing now, which admittedly right now is minimal. This is minimal. And that's why there's probably a relatively small number of people watching this. Although, actually, considering how many people watch Tucker Carlson, maybe that's not relevant. But the point is that this is the way that entertainment is going to be. And the production qualities and so forth will entirely depend upon the budgets. But we already have the ability at our current level to produce, a regular news type thing, to produce, your basic talk show type stuff. Eventually we're going to, as we grow, we've been in a plateau here for the past, really 2 years. Mostly due to the fact that we had infrastructure issues to tackle. But we're already at the point that, I don't know if you realize it, but there's over 5,000 videos up here on unauthorized. I mean, the sheer amount of content is unbelievable. Yeah. Fonzie Bear says unauthorized is the only channel that is worth the money by far. Well, I appreciate that. And of course, it's much more affordable than most. But we're adding some new creators. John De La Rose is coming on. I've talked to Alex McCree and encouraged him to come on. And once we get the bindery fully operational, then I'm going to turn a little bit more attention to improving our offerings on unauthorized and improving how I'm doing it. Hawk says he asked ChatGPT to structure an interview with him about his Conan story. Email that to me, please. I would very much like to see it. But the thing is that we're always going to have to deal with the fact that because the unauthorized small u tend to be much more independent minded, it's always going to be fundamentally difficult for them to work under an umbrella of any kind, even a friendly one, even a protective one. And so, that's always going to be the difficulty. But, and also the technology is there for people to essentially just set up and do their own thing. Vox, have you heard of Nick Fuentes? I think he would be a good fit for unauthorized. Wow, were those people wrong? Wow, were those people wrong? I mean, if there's one thing that we've learned about Nick Fuentes, it's what he and I determined, the first two times, or the first time we talked, which was that it made no sense for us to have him on, and it made no sense for him, given what he wanted to do, to have on. He wanted to run his own show. Segment Omega says people are afraid of subscribing. They don't want to get doxxed in a hack. I mean, that may be true. I haven't seen any sign of that. Most of these people are, signed up to Gavin stuff, which is a much bigger problem. Getting doxxed subscribing to unauthorized would not really be an issue because nobody cares about unauthorized. I mean, think about it. When have you ever seen unauthorized get attacked? It hasn't been. Partly I think because they don't want the Streisand effect, but also partly because there's not really that much to attack. I mean, basically the only thing that there is really to attack is Owen, and it really doesn't matter what you say about Owen. Owen's more than happy to tell you himself for 3 hours. Yeah, Antifa isn't going to show up at your house because you watch the Darkstream. That's true. So, but anyhow, I think that the Nibmeister says paywalls help prevent attack. Well, yeah, they do, because obviously, there's a few, there's obviously a few gammas who, pay in order to, do their little paid spying and whatever. And, that's fine. And of course, then, they try to spread it out there. They try to put it on YouTube or whatever, which is kind of funny because YouTube has made it very clear they don't want me on YouTube. Like, not if I put it there, not if people don't like me put it there. it just it kind of makes me laugh when I see that, because it's like, okay, you know, um, it just strikes me as so fundamentally backwards. You know, YouTube's going out of their way to keep you off it, so we're gonna expose him by putting him on it. It's crazy. Given that Tucker Carlson is joining Twitter for his show and the new CEO is from NBC, will it go all in on streaming? Well, yeah. I mean, Twitter is the new gatekeeper. You know, YouTube. I think it's probably a mistake. I think Tucker Carlson joining Twitter um, is either a mistake or it will turn out to be a revelation of who Tucker Carlson really is. So, um, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, honestly, I pay absolutely zero attention to YouTube. Somebody told me the other day that they got recommended my Voxiversity about Jordan Peterson, and that it has over 100,000 views. Now, it's great, but that was news to me, you know. Um, doesn't particularly seem to you know, doesn't particularly seem to sell any Jordanetics books. Not that that was the purpose for doing it, but I just find it interesting that you can have 100,000 views and not have it even move the needle on Amazon sales or something. You can be right wing and on YouTube, but you can't effectively challenge the narrative and be on YouTube. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, but the thing is here, I mean, just with the Darkstream alone, you get, straight information about the critiques of evolution and free trade. Um, you get SSH. You get um, reasonably informed and intelligent analysis of the clown world situation and Russia and China and that sort of thing. Um, you know, it's not as entertaining as Friends or whatever the big network show is today, obviously. But I think that it's at least as uh, at least as entertaining as your generic talking head rambling about nothing but uh, various forms of the narrative. You know, I mean, at least at least there's something that potentially unexpected, right? It's not completely and utterly predictable. And Jesus Christ, absolutely. But there's plenty of people speaking the truth about Jesus Christ on every platform, which is great. I'm just saying that I don't think that's exactly a unique selling point. The one where Ross thinks he's a Sigma, yeah, that would be a good one. And you're actually right, because Ross is exactly the kind of person who, like, I am kind of like Indiana Jones. Like, no, you're not. What do you think will happen to things like Twitter as the U.S. falls apart? I think it will fall apart too. I mean, Twitter is struggling because it was propped up before, and now it's not propped up. It's pretty simple. But I'm really excited about the opportunities that AI, both with the art and with the chat GPT and stuff. I think that's going to create some incredible opportunities for unauthorized and for ArcTunes, because they're just tools. So if you've got better tools, if you've got more effective tools, and you've got good, smart people using them in a way that is actually trying to create something good and beautiful and true, it's going to be really powerful. I think it'll be incredibly powerful. Yeah, witness the scads of YouTube conservatives owning the libs, skit after skit after freaking skit. Yeah, I mean, it's just not interesting. It's not funny. But imagine if we can train in the AI on our artwork and then start producing animations from it. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be incredibly effective. So, all right. Well, on that note, I will leave you all and wish you a good night. Remember, tomorrow, I believe, is Mother's Day. And so don't forget to get your wife a card, call your mother, etc. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.